Welcome back. The time is 14 minutes past 8, and you're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salalo Makwidi, your home of humanitarian journalism, and your companion, your spiritual companion this Ramadan, Salam Media. And we're going to kickstart the show, I think, with a very, very important conversation. And the reality is, Israel is in crisis, not just in Gaza, but internally as well. Protests are erupting across the country, with Israeli citizens accusing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of using war as a political weapon to maintain his grip on power. And at the heart of the outrage is obviously his decision to fire the head of Israel's intelligence security agency, Shin Bet. And amid reports of government failures before the October 7th ordeal, meanwhile, some families of the hostages are demanding an immediate ceasefire, saying diplomacy and not endless bombing will bring their loved ones home. But is this really about security, or is Netanyahu exploiting war to survive politically? And what does this all mean for Palestinians who continue to suffer under relentless bombardment? And joining me is Jeff Halper, the director of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions and the leading voice against Israel's occupation policies. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you here on Salam Media.
Thanks for having me again.
I think first and foremost, we can kickstart the conversation with this growing narrative, especially from protesters in Israel, that Benjamin Netanyahu is using this war as a shield to stay in power. What's your take on this? Is this a correct assessment of where we find ourselves, particularly during this past week?
No, it's exactly an accurate perception of the situation. What's interesting for me is your introduction was excellent, and in a way, you don't need me. I mean, if in South Africa, it's so clear and so accurate what exactly is happening in terms of Gaza, it really shows in a way how transparent everything is and how helpless we are to change it. Because what you said is exactly true. It has nothing to do with Hamas. It has nothing to do with Gaza. The Palestinians just don't matter at all. They're pawns. They're simply pawns in a very cynical game that everybody knows, in which the deal for Netanyahu to keep his government going was his two right-wing parties of Smotrich and Ben Gvir said, we are going to leave the government, or actually one was going to leave and one was going to rejoin. Ben Gvir rejoined yesterday. If you don't renew the war after stage one, if you go into stage two, which means releasing more hostages that Hamas agreed to. Hamas never, broke the ceasefire in any way. They want stage B to go ahead, but it means the end of the war. And his right-wing parties refuse that. And so he really has a very stark choice. You presented it very well. His choice is, do I have a government? And can I continue with this government, which is very stable until the next election in 2026? Or do I go to stage two, release the hostages, end the war, and then my government falls? So it has nothing whatsoever to do with Palestinians. Last night in the attacks, more than 70 Palestinian civilians were killed. More than a dozen yesterday, 400 the day before. These are all simply human sacrifices with no military or political meaning whatsoever, in order for Netanyahu to stay in power. And the Israeli people know this. You're right. The hostage families are outraged. Last night, there were tens of thousands of people in the street. Everybody knows this, from Hamas to the international community to the Israeli public itself. But it's impossible to touch Netanyahu because he has a stable coalition. You can't overthrow him. You can't. And the only pressure could really come from Trump. And of course, Trump has no idea what he wants to do. On the one hand, Trump very much wants the hostages to get out. They appeal to him all the time. The hostage families are in the Oval Office all the time. But on the other hand, he wants to open the gates of hell. to the Palestinians. So he has no policy whatsoever. And the United States has stepped out. If you notice, Witkoff, the negotiations have stepped out. I have no idea where Qatar and Egypt are in all of this. They've been quiet. The whole world has gone quiet. The Palestinians are simply being sacrificed for a government coalition. It's outraging Israelis, and it should outrage all of us, of course. But it really shows the degree to which you play the rap song "Rise Up" at the beginning of your show, and the whole idea is, how can we let this happen? Let's rise up. Let's resist. But really, what Gaza shows is that we really have very little power to do that. How do we rise up? And Gaza is really a test in terms of any ability to end these tragedies that we see happening before our eyes.
And speaking on, rising up, there was over, from reports that we're getting, there was over 40,000 people in Tel Aviv protesting Netanyahu's move to fire Shin Bet, the former Mossad chief. I want to touch on that, on the political fallout in Netanyahu's government. Is this just political infighting, or does it signal something deeper about Israel's internal crisis?
I don't think it signifies anything deeper. There is no internal crisis politically, in a sense. In other words, all the 40,000 people went out in Tel Aviv last night. There were thousands more here in Jerusalem. They're not against Israel attacking Gaza. They're not against the killing of Gazan civilians. I mean, a lot of these protesters and even the hostage families say, get the hostages back. That's the hostages are the issue, not the Palestinians, not Gaza, not, peace in the Middle East or whatever. They say, get the hostage back, and then we can always go back and wipe out Hamas. We can always go back. And their problem isn't the military attacks in Gaza. There's no political crisis from the fact that people don't agree with Netanyahu's policies. The only issue is the hostages. You see, because it's clear that is, what Netanyahu is arguing is that the more we increase military pressure, the more chance we have to release the hostages. Because the price of releasing the hostages, according to the agreement that Israel signed with Hamas, is that it ends the war. But he can't end the war because of Smotrich and Ben Gvir. And so the only other way is to force Hamas to release the hostages. And here he uses Trump's idea of the gates of hell that Trump is supporting, using that in order to try to put military pressure on Hamas to release all the hostages. But we know that doesn't work. It hasn't worked for the last year and a half. You see, and the hostage families know that. That's the crisis. But that his strategy of releasing the hostages is simply going to kill them. So that's the crisis. In other words, there's no, and that's really the tragedy of it all. Israelis don't care about the Palestinians. They don't care. That's not the issue at all. And so it really all boils down to an issue of what's the best strategy of releasing the hostages. Do we force Hamas by force to do that? Or do we go back to the ceasefire agreements, which means ending the war that he can't do? You see, it's really, I mean, it's here that meets the eye in terms of any kind of deep political thinking or processes or anything like that.
And I'm noticing something about Benjamin Netanyahu, and as an African, is something that I probably know all too well, with how our leaders here, political leaders, no matter at what level, if they're facing, some kind of corruption charges, the first thing that they would resort to is making sure that they hold on to power. Do you think this legal troubles are also influencing his decision? We know he's facing those corruption charges. Are they also at play? Make sure that, if I'm still prime minister, if I'm still head of the state, then I can be able to avert these legal challenges that I'm facing.
No, of course that's a part of the game. He's facing numerous trials and numerous scandals. Now, when we have what's called Qatar Gate, where people in his own office were paid by Qatar. He had agents of Qatar in his own prime minister's office. And that's, and firing the head of the Shin Bet. And I mean, there's a lot of scandals. He wouldn't last 10 minutes, as a free person if his government fell. So obviously it's not only, his desire to stay in power, which is by itself, as a very strong motivation for these people. But really, it's true that if his government falls, he's very vulnerable. He could very easily end up in jail. I mean, he's the most hated man in Israel, I would say. And he would lose if there was any election. So that, that's obviously another thing behind it. I guess the tragedy, behind all of this is how little the Palestinians matter. I mean, how really willing the world is to sacrifice them. I mean, where is Europe? Where are BRICS? Where's China? Where's Russia? Where's the Arab world? I mean, we're talking about the Muslim world, the Rohingya, and so on. That solidarity in the Muslim world is so crucial. Where's the Muslim world in terms? I mean, the street, the people support the Palestinians, but the governments are all in bed with Israel. They're heading towards a new normalization process with Israel. And so, the political lesson here is that the Palestinians are simply being sacrificed for meaningless, cynical political, manipulations on the part of Netanyahu, and the entire world sits back and lets it happen. So again, I go back to the questions of rise up. What tools do we have to stop that? And they don't seem to be many.
I want us to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want to touch a bit on, I think, something that you've encroached just a little bit on, the element of Donald Trump and how his, second return has changed the dynamics of this genocide. But we'll touch on that a bit after this.
Get anything done these days. With all the distractions, when do they even get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include Sunfoil, triple refined pure sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying, or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunfoil, now we're cooking.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African experience. For reservations, call now on 042-203-1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
This Ramadan, the PSA will again bring Palestinian voices to you. Join us from Monday to Friday at 4:30 p.m. on Salam Media as we bring you authentic grassroots insight on the day-to-day lived experiences of Palestinians and their struggle for justice and equality. Also join our mass iftar at Emerentia Primary School on Saturday, 15 March from 5:30 p.m. Importantly, support our humanitarian aid drive to support healthcare and housing in Gaza. Contributions can be deposited into Palestine Solidarity Alliance, Absa Bank, account 4070101666. Kindly reference regarding Zakah or Lillah. For further information, call 082-513-3750. Join our socials for updates on upcoming events, programs, guests, and podcasts. Contact 082-513-3750.
Freedom Stationery supply Marlin and Marlin Kids pens to me and my school friends. They supply just about everything we need to help us get a better education, from books to files to rulers. In fact, any any accessory we need. Freedom Stationery. Education for the nation. What does accessory mean?
Abu Huraira narrated that he heard the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, say, "In black seed there is a healing for every disease except death." This Ramadan, experience the health benefits of this ancient blessed seed by using the Tib Black Seed range. Black seed assists the body to boost immunity, regulate blood sugar levels, reduce inflammation, and act as a potent antioxidant. Experience a holistic approach to health by introducing the Tib Black Seed range into your Ramadan routine. Available in capsules, pure cold-pressed oil, and a vapor rub. Trust Tib Health Sciences for quality black seed products. For more information, visit blackseed.co.za. Available at leading pharmacies.
You are listening to Salam Media live from our headquarters in South Africa. This is Salam Media, keeping you company this Ramadan.
Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salailo Makwidir, and we're still talking to Professor Jeff Halper, the director of Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. And we're talking about Benjamin Netanyahu's relentless genocide agenda and trying to figure out what could be next for the region and for the people of Gaza amid the rejected peace talks and what has been currently happening this past week, where you have more than 1,000 people that have been killed by the constant Israeli bombardment, and thousands more that have been injured. Prof, thank you so much for staying with us. Before we went on that short break, I wanted to touch briefly on Donald Trump and how his return has changed the dynamics of this genocide. It almost looks like he's playing a god in Gaza, while Israel itself acts like a spoiled brat, far from Israel's, red heifer. He appears to be pulling the strings in Gaza and causing Israel to throw his toys out of the pram. Is that, the assessment? He's the mastermind. I mean, the Israelis even said we made contact with Washington before we went on those attacks. The beginning of this week. How do you assess his second coming? We know it's still early days. He said he would bring peace in the Middle East, during the elections campaign. But it almost feels like the inverse is happening. He's the warlord now, and Benjamin Netanyahu is loving his presence.
No, exactly. Look, historically, way before Trump, really since 1967, the United States has had a monopoly over any negotiations, any peace processes between Israel and the Palestinians. That's been agreed upon. Israel insisted upon that. Europe has stayed out. The rest of the world has stayed out. So that's not new. That the United States is pro-Israel. I mean, Biden has said he's a Zionist. Israel gets absolute support from the United States, and yet the United States, is the only mediator. So the Palestinians have been in a losing game forever, since 1967. Now, add to that Trump. You used to have countervailing forces in the world. You had the ICJ with its ruling about genocide. And then it ruled, the ICJ also, that the occupation was illegal and Israel had to end it. You had the ICC, with its arrest warrants. You have the UN with its resolutions. You have a General Assembly, that has a certain amount of power. You have, and then you had public pressures. You have people on the streets in London, in Washington. South Africa has been tremendously active in a positive way on this issue. In other words, there's been ways of pressuring governments to respond to the Palestinian issue. The Palestinians have been able to mobilize international public opinion. But Trump came in, and this is a word we all use more and more now, completely transactional. He's a businessman, and you could see that in his approach to Gaza. Gaza for him is real estate. The people of Gaza are exactly like the poor people of New York City. When Trump wants to build Trump Tower, he's got $1 billion to do it. He has his permits from the municipality. And it doesn't matter that there's 100,000 poor people living in a neighborhood there. He comes in, he destroys it, and builds Trump Tower. That's exactly the mindset of Gaza. It's transactional. For Trump, there is no human rights. There's no international law. There's no concept like justice or peace or any kinds of values. So there's no way of pressuring him at all. And then you're right, he's a bully. So he says to Egypt, you know what? If you want to try to play a mediating role and you come against me, I'll cut off all your military aid. He said the same thing. Look, you humiliated King Abdullah in Washington. You did a Zelensky on King Abdullah when he was here. So all these governments that are dependent on the Americans, especially because they're autocratic and they don't have the support of their own people, and without American and Israeli military and security, equipment, they'll get overthrown. So, they're all kind of in bed with each other. But what we have lost, and here again, I go back to what Rise Up. What we have lost since that song was written is any ability to affect a transactional world of Trump. He just doesn't care. And once you say, I don't care, I'm immune, you can never pressure me, then what do? You see? And I think that's where we're really kind of lost together with the Palestinians. We have the support of the peoples of the world. Justice is on their side. Even the technicalities, the ceasefire agreement, they never broke. Israel broke it. Everybody says that, but there's no price to pay. And that's the problem with Israel. Israel knows it, and it doesn't care. It doesn't matter the ICJ, the UN, the ICC, whatever, as long as there's no sanctions. Who cares? Criticize us. And there are no sanctions. And there could be no sanctions because of the American veto in the Security Council and American bullying. So, I write about global Palestine because I think you're right. You touched on this as well. And that is that the Palestinians are kind of like the canary in the cage. What's happening to them can happen easily to any other people in the world. Because once you remove all these counter forces like human rights, like international law, like justice, like the UN, and all the mechanisms and structures that control people in power and try to give some power to oppressed peoples are gone, then what do? And in some ways, I think Gaza and the plight of the Palestinians really shows that that's the situation we're in. How do we actually rise up in the name of the oppressed in a world that's completely transactional? It's based on power, military, and it just doesn't care. And it's cynical, So we go back to the whole thing, that the whole reason people are dying in Gaza is simply because Netanyahu wants to stay in power. Everybody knows it, and we're powerless to do anything about it. And that's the challenge, I think. I think this Palestinian issue in Gaza is presenting a much larger challenge that has to do with the Rohingya. It has to do with oppressed peoples everywhere, because we've lost our ability to pursue a human rights and justice agenda in the world, it seems to me.
And I think we're going to leave it on that sad note, Prof. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Always appreciate your valuable insights.
Thanks for having me.
There you go. That was Professor Jeff. That was Professor Jeff Halper coming to us live from Al Quds. And yeah, I think he's painting a very, very bleak picture. Who's to say that what's currently happening in Gaza right now could not be happening to Cape Town, could not be happening to Johannesburg or Nairobi or any part of the world because, well, impunity. We've let impunity succeed. We've let billionaires, we've let corrupt politicians succeed. We've not done anything about the strive for the people of Palestine is now brazen. As Professor Jeff Halper mentioned there, that they just don't even care anymore. You can criticize us as much as you can, but if there's no tangible effect to your criticism, then what good does it make? What difference does it make? And I think it's about time we start rethinking how we go about things now. It feels and looks like we are in the next phase of this genocide, and the oppression and continued apartheid on steroid state of affairs for the people of Palestine, for the people of Gaza. The other side has found new ways. They've found new strategies. And what do we do? Is it still enough to go out to the streets, to consulates, to scream "Free Palestine" and then go home to our comfy, creature comforts, and that's it? And then we tweet, and then we have TikTok videos, but ultimately there's no tangible, meaningful difference that we could be making. So I think maybe for this year, for 2025, from an activism point of view, from a solidarity point of view, the mission should be counteracting and making sure that the other side feels the tangible, the hurt, whether it's in the pocket or it's, I don't know, but there needs to be a rethinking of strategies. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, News and Views continues after this.